And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com. And joining me, as always, is contributor Shayne Kubas. We are going to talk about Cameron Sutton today, just signed with the Pittsburgh Steelers. We're going to talk about what that means to the team. Cameron Heyward showed up to OTA, so we're going to brush on that as well. And we're going to break down his kind of sticky contract situation, see where this thing could go, because I don't think it's as cut and dry as everybody thinks. We'll get into the details with that. So let's start with some of the news, though, this week, Shayne, around the NFL. Justin Jefferson has just completely obliterated the wide receiver market, reset it to levels that we have never seen before in this league. Now, again, the salary cap goes up every year and there's inflation, and so that's accounted for that. But $35 million per year, $140 million in total, $110 in guarantees. Jefferson is the NFL's new highest paid wide receiver of all time. He is now the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL, Shayne, surpassing Nick Bosa's $34 million a year. This is going to have some implications. It's going to have a ripple effect kind of in the rest of the league. We already saw a few receivers that surpassed the $30 million mark. A.J. Brown did that. Even Amon-Ra St. Brown recently did that. And so I wasn't surprised by Jefferson's deal, Shayne, but it's still very notable because I think that you look at this even cross-positionally, and we can look at guys like TJ Watt and Micah Parsons and other contracts coming up saying, well, I know that I don't play the same position, but that guy's making a lot of money. I'm the best at what I do. How is this going to affect things?
I think it's very interesting because what I was wondering with this deal was when was it going to come, right? Were they going to be able to get this done ahead of the season? Was this something that was going to drag on into the season, into the offseason next year? Mm-hmm. Or were they going to say, listen, we know we're going to have to reset the market. Like, that's just a given. This is the best young receiver, if not the best receiver, period, in all of football. He's going to reset the market. Like, that was well known. It was how much is he going to push it? Is he going to push for close to 40? Because realistically, he could have asked for it for what he's done for this team. I mean, this guy has had 1,000 yards every year, and last year he played 10 games and didn't even finish all 10 of those games. Like, this is just a different level of player compared to really even some of the other best receivers in the league. But it comes in a little bit closer to kind of what I expected, which is that $35 million a year, which when you factor in inflation is not that much more than, say, like the Tyreek Hill contract or some of the other deals that just got signed. But it is still significantly more on a year-to-year basis than any other deal we've seen. And I think that that's what Jefferson probably wanted. I don't know if he cared too much to push it beyond that. So he gets what he wanted. But more importantly, like you were saying, how does this affect the rest of the league in terms of other star players? It's not just the receiver position, because you have CeeDee Lamb still needs a contract. Brandon Ayuk still needs a contract. And now neither of those guys are quite on Jefferson's level, but they're going to ask for probably close to that now because he set that high water mark now. And then other players like, the edge rushers of the world, things like that. So definitely is kind of an eye-opening number for the rest of the league to kind of look at and go, okay, that guy is now the highest paid player in the sport that doesn't play quarterback. Let's see how close we can get to those numbers.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the biggest implications obviously come for a team like the Dallas Cowboys or the 49ers. One of those who has a receiver waiting in the wings and is ready to get that contract extension. But also, Shayne, we could look ahead to next offseason, and we can look at a guy like George Pickens, who will be entering a contract year. I mean, I just wrote an article, Shayne, about how the Steelers already have a big question when it comes to Pickens. And obviously that, I think, has to do with effort in a lot of ways. We can look at, go back and look at some clips from last year where the blocking effort wasn't there. He was taking some plays off. That needs to improve, obviously. But now we add another to the mix and say, all right, if Pickens steps up from what he did last year, and again, we look at it for what it is, 1,140 yards and 5 touchdowns for a receiver who averaged 10.5 yards a target with Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, and Mason Rudolph. Like, that's some impressive stuff at 23 years old. So he was doing it performing at a high level at a young age. If he takes another step forward this year, what could a George Pickens contract look like now? Like if he increases his production by 10, 15%. And so I do think that this will have a ripple effect on the league. And obviously Pickens he's not going to touch Justin Jefferson numbers, but agents can use these type of contracts as talking points. They can use an A.J. Brown or an Amon-Ra St. Brown as a talking point and say, hey, if these guys are getting $30 million a year, my client is good. And he's had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons or just put together, if Pickens strings together 1,400 yards. I'll be really interested to see if this is even something that's doable by the Steelers. Are they going to want to mess with that for a guy that they didn't know beforehand if they want to lock up into a long-term deal anyway? And so I do think it's going to have an effect on them going into next season. And obviously there's going to be more contracts that play out throughout this time next year as well. Shayne, let's move on and we'll talk about Cameron Heyward showing up to Steelers OTAs. This is a welcome sight. I think everybody wants him there. A lot of Steelers fans will argue they wanted him there from the beginning. To me, it doesn't really matter all that really much. I mean, you got to remember, these are voluntary. Nobody's required to be there. And considering the circumstances, I wouldn't have been shocked to see Heyward not show up until training camp maybe. Now, obviously this time next week, we'll be in the middle of mandatory mini camp, and technically teams can fine a player for not showing up there. That's a bad PR move on the part of the Steelers. In my opinion, Shayne, I don't think that they do it if Heyward were to not be on hand, but I think it's a good sign of where things are headed because he is at OTAs. Doesn't mean that the contract is coming yet. We're going to talk about that, but I think it's a good sign at the least. He's going to be in there with his teammates and he's showing his leadership.
Yeah, I think for him, it's more about if he is going to continue this type of not hold out necessarily, but kind of similar to what TJ did, right? Where he was in the building, he was at practice, he just didn't actually do anything, right? He didn't want to risk injury. Obviously, he also wanted to show hey, I'm not prepared to actually work for this team right now, technically, until my contract demands are met. That's probably the path this is taking from what I can tell. And I think that's probably the most that he'd be willing to do. I don't think he's going to truly miss of team-related activities that are important for him to be at. I think he wants to be out there, even if it's not in a playing capacity. Yeah. So we'll see kind of what he chooses to do once we get to that point, if there's no new contract by then. But I don't expect him to truly actually be away from the team from this point forward.
Yeah, and when he hangs around, I expect it to be almost in a coaching role where you're going to be watching from the sideline.
Hey, at his age, that's probably kind of should be what it is anyway, honestly. So
I agree. And I know some people will have an issue with this. Well, if he's there, he should be playing. He's an old player, first of all. Secondly, he's in a contract year. He has no incentive to be out there if we're looking at things from what makes sense from his standpoint. And I think that's important to consider, obviously. There's no sense of going out there and risking injury to yourself if you don't have that guaranteed money coming your way, if you don't have that security, that long-term security. Now, we're going to talk about whether that's the right choice for both parties or not, and we're going to break that down. But from Heyward's perspective, there's absolutely no incentive to be out there. There's only maybe some incentive to be there with your team and show your support, but you don't have to do that. You're not required to do that. You are supposed to show up at mandatory minicamp. It's why they call it mandatory. But I kind of doubt that even if he wasn't there, Shayne, that the Steelers would find him anyway, because they know they've got a relationship with this guy. They know who he is.
Yeah, I don't think they would be doing that again. I think he's going to be there now. If he does anything beyond some light workout stuff, I'd be surprised. And again, that's one, because I think that's kind of what the angle he's going to take is. But two, he just doesn't have to do it. This is just a player that doesn't really need to do those things on the field. I think we kind of all know at this point, at least you hope so, what you're supposed to be getting from him on the field. So that's again, the direction I think is going to go is more in that, I'm here, but I'm not going to really do anything until I'm comfortable with where I'm at. So.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to talk about that later in the show today. Steelers sign Cameron Sutton. We're going to break this down in detail, so I won't spend a lot of time talking about it. But Shayne, what are your initial thoughts?
Not really unexpected after the situation with him and the Lions letting him go, and the conversations going back to, I think, the Combine is where they talked to him around the time of the Combine happening, something like that. I forget if that was the time period, but there's been conversations about this for a while now, and I think this is what was going to happen if he was going to be playing this year. I feel like it was going to be with the Steelers, so not unexpected, and we'll get into the details of it here shortly. So.
All right, Shayne. And then just today, Clarence Hill Jr., writer for the Cowboys, came out and said that Micah Parsons essentially is not closing the door on playing with the Steelers. He asked Parsons about the contract situation. Parsons is willing to be very patient when it comes to getting his money. He fully expects from Clarence Hill to be the highest paid non-quarterback in the league. And so in order to do that, he would have to surpass Justin Jefferson's $35 million a year. I think that's doable considering that Nick Bosa has already been paid in the past $34 million a year.
We're already basically there.
Yeah, you factor in the inflation as it goes up. Very attainable. But Parsons, essentially said that he is not closing the door on the Pittsburgh Steelers. If it came down between the Steelers and Eagles, he'd pick the Steelers, kind of brush the Eagles to the side. Looking at hometown teams, obviously, from Harrisburg, Pittsburgh, and Philly, kind of right in the middle of the two. So it's not happening. Like this is a pipe dream.
At least not anytime in the near future. That's not.
No,
happening.
It's like Tomlin said. I believe it was when he was asked by the media about moving from an NFL head coach and coaching in college. Never say never, but never. I mean, the Steelers have so much money and resources invested into their edge position. They have a future Hall of Famer there right now. They've got one of the best number 2s in the league. Time-wise, money-wise, this just isn't going to add up for him to join.
Yeah.
As interesting as that would be to see two legendary type players together getting after the quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I think down the stretch of his career, if he wanted to go home per se, and I think that the writer for the Cowboys mentioned that wording is like, down the stretch of his career, then sure, if he's still a good player and he's looking to finish his career out and he's looking at teams, I guess he's saying that, he would be picking the Steelers over like the Eagles, which makes sense. Mm-hmm. Not only, based on maybe that was just who a lot of people were rooting for in his area. I'm not really sure where Harrisburg's allegiance lies in terms of like the average fan there, but also playing for the Cowboys now, I'm sure he probably doesn't want to be one of the guys that goes to the Eagles if he doesn't have to. So, hey, gets to pick, us if that ever comes to fruition, that'd be cool, as long as he's playing well still. But yeah, as far as like the near future, we're already paying an edge rusher top money. I don't think we need to pay another one like truly top tier money. I think we'll be able to save that money for other things. We'll say that.
Yeah, and this is a conversation for another day, Shayne, but should the Steelers be the ones to jump out ahead and get the TJ Watt deal done before Micah? Like, I mean, if Justin Jefferson's went this way, I mean, we could be looking at just some enormous numbers. Now, obviously, Watt's got 2 years left on his deal. Parsons doesn't have to sign right away. He's obviously still under contract and has got that 5th-year option. Dallas has another big deal to get done with CeeDee Lamb too. So they've got a couple big things in the works here.
Yeah. I mean, not a Cowboys show, obviously, but the Cowboys have a lot of decisions to make because if they sign Lamb and Parsons, I don't see Prescott being the quarterback for them after this year. Because you're paying, that would be just the three
you're
of
looking
them.
At 60 plus for Dak at that point. So
you're looking at probably over $120 million a year to those 3 players if you were to sign them to new contracts. That's just, I don't know if that's possible to field an actual football team that way. So we'll keep an eye out on who does get a contract from Dallas because one of those 3 at least probably isn't. Like it's going to be one of them isn't going to get it, at least in my opinion. So we'll see.
And Deron Bland isn't up yet, but he's coming off of just an amazing year.
We'll see how that goes. Yeah.
Candidate last year for Defensive Player of the Year. So let's move on, Shayne, and we're gonna break away from the Cowboys show now. We're gonna be the Still Curtain podcast.
Right. Yeah.
Let's talk about Cameron Sutton. What does this mean for the Steelers? Let's first just brush on the legal situation here for those who aren't aware. It was less than 3 months ago. I think it was like around March 21st.
Somewhere around there. From what
Cameron Sutton was released by the Detroit Lions because an arrest warrant was issued. He was involved in a domestic violence, domestic battery, I believe was the case. It was a felony at first, was later downgraded. Yes, was later downgraded to a misdemeanor. And so, although he might not see any further legal action that way, the NFL can still enforce disciplinary measures if they choose to. If they do anything, you're probably looking at a game or 2 because it's a misdemeanor. I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in all the legalistic part of this, but the Steelers have signed Cameron Sutton, issues and all, a former good defensive back for this team. Now, last year for the Detroit Lions, he was forced to play on the outside, played 1,100 snaps as a boundary cornerback. That's just not his forte. And I could have told you that, and I could have told the Lions, if this is how you're planning on using this guy, you're going to fail him because he's not an outside corner. He really is a nickel and dime defender, and I think he can be a really good one in that role. But as an outside guy at 5'11" on the dot, 188 pounds with 30-inch arms and average athletic traits, like you're just not going to body up big receivers. You're not going to match the athleticism of smaller, shiftier receivers. But for this role, Shayne, I think that it creates an interesting situation. So where do you think he's going to play on the Steelers? I think the role is pretty evident, but I'll let you go ahead and chime in.
Yeah, I mean, if he's going to be a full-time starter with us, it's going to be from the inside, similar to how he was used whenever he was here last. And I think more importantly, like as you brought up about the fact that he played, over 1,100 snaps and was the top snap getter on that Lions defense last year as an outside boundary corner. And obviously, they had a lot of corner issues. They needed help there. Again, if you were asking us, and I think a lot of Steelers fans, if the Lions should sign him to that contract with the intention of playing him on the outside, the answer would have been pretty simply no. This isn't a guy that is built to play outside a lot. Now, he's a guy who can play outside in certain situations on certain receivers. Like he can go out there for a little bit. He's a slot corner that can play outside versus a true inside-out versatility type player like a Jalen Ramsey, things like that's not the type of player Sutton has ever been. So I think the problem with him ultimately, and I shouldn't say the problem, but where he was failed, like you said, is what role he was asked to play. Where with the Steelers, they know exactly what his strengths and weaknesses are. They know what he's going to be good at. That's going to be being the primary slot corner for this team, most likely, barring someone else emerging from that group in the meantime. But this gives them a floor that they didn't really have before. I think that's the key thing is like if he's the best player on the roster for the spot and he is able to hold it down for a year at a decent level, great. If someone beats him out, it probably means they're actually a starting caliber slot corner, right? So like that's kind of where this is for me at least.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to assess it. The Steelers have Dante Jackson there. Obviously, he has never played much slot at all in his career, despite his undersized frame as well. He's a much better athlete than what Sutton is, more play speed. Sutton's going to kick inside to the slot, and I think that this covers their bases. Like you look at their roster before this, you had an extremely underwhelming and injury-prone Anthony Averett, who was not good in his last football, which came 2 years ago. Beanie Bishop, an undrafted free agent. Josiah Scott, a journeyman guy, was like on the Eagles, and just no quality options. Nobody you can count on for sure. It's almost one of those situations prior to this where it's like you have to pray that one of these guys is going to step up and fill this role, because otherwise you're looking at a glaring weakness in this secondary. Now, yes, Sutton regressed last year, being played a little bit out of position. I think when you put him back in a slot role, I know he's 29 years old. That's not ancient. Okay. It's not like you've got Patrick Peterson in here.
Yeah, we just had
5 years
like,
old.
33-year-old Patrick Peterson out there.
Yeah. So. I mean, he's still, for a cornerback, he's exiting his prime years at this point, but he signed a 1-year contract for the veteran minimum. Like, I think that he's going to be able to live up to that billing for sure, and probably surpass that pretty easily. But slot is where he's going to play. That's where he's always been at his best. And I think you can kind of trace Steelers cornerback problems back to following the 2021 season, where they lost both Steven Nelson and Mike Hilton. And anytime you do that, it was from there where Sutton was asked to be more of a versatile type guy, play inside, play outside. And you could see that even then that he was better as a slot cornerback than he was as a true boundary cornerback. And so that's why I said when the Lions dished out a 3-year, $33 million contract, $11 million per year for Sutton, I thought that I questioned it at the time, because I'm like, that's, first of all, it's a lot of money for a cornerback who might not be that true number one guy and isn't. And a guy that you are probably going to end up playing out of position, which they did. And so for the Steelers, I like the fit much, much better. And again, they haven't announced how they plan to use him, but it's very easy to see just based on the current makeup of the roster.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
So let's talk about this new look secondary here, Shayne. And then we'll see if we can get to any chats here. If you guys are joining us here, drop your questions for us in the live chat. We'd love to get to what you have to say. So let's take a pause and we'll do that right now, Shayne.
Yeah, so we do have one chat here. Of course, our Parlay 18 joined us as always. Hey guys, I'm curious to understand why people in the media, even local guys, don't understand that we're going to try to run the ball and play defense, but they're expecting us to throw up like 400 yards per game. Yeah, so as far as like local media and things like that, like obviously we're technically a part of that, but more importantly, like anytime a quarterback change happens in particular, at least from my experience, like watching this kind of happen both to the Steelers and also watching a lot of other teams that go through this, there's either this level of optimism that is kind of becomes too much, or there's pessimism. And I think you get both in most cases, but especially with our situation, the quarterback situation was such an issue and the offensive coordinator situation was such an issue for the past couple of years, that the fact that all of it is different now, all of a sudden, guys are going to get excited. they're going to be like, all right, this is what, we're going to finally do this. We're going to do this and that. I think people who really follow the Steelers and follow the team know that that's not really the direction they're trying to go. Now, obviously, every team's trying to put up as many yards and points as they can theoretically, right? But the way that this team intends to do that does probably limit their ceiling in terms of like putting up huge yardage games and points and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But they're trying to get to a point where like we're coming from legitimately the bottom, right? It's not like, oh, okay, we need to up a couple more points a game, a couple of touchdowns here and there. Like, no, we have to go from like averaging barely any points to averaging enough points to actually be competitive against good teams. Like that's the only thing we're trying to do. It is not going to be this from like 280 yards. It felt like a game to like 400. It's not going to happen. So if you're hearing that, don't really worry about it too much. I don't know why they're thinking that outside of just trying to be optimistic for the first time in a couple of years on offense. But yeah, it's not probably the reality we're living in. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, and I haven't really heard that circulated, but I'm not buying that either. We know based on Arthur Smith and what the Steelers, the game plan they want to execute, and Mike Tomlin. I mean, they want to run the football, they want to play good defense.
They're set up to do.
Isn't something that has changed. And I think even if you go back to the Ben days, like I think that's where some headbutting might have occurred, where they wanted to be a little bit more pass happy back then. And obviously their offenses were much better than they were these days. So, but I don't see anywhere in that ballpark, really. I think it would have to take some substantial changes to everything, their identity, really, if they were to do something like that.
Exactly.
All right, Shayne, let's move back to the secondary now. And we're going to talk about not just Cam Sutton, but this unit as a whole. Like suddenly we look at it and where's the biggest weakness now? Maybe it's Sutton from the slot. Deshaun Elliott was pretty solid with Miami. Dante Jackson, I mean, he's been up and down over the course of his career, but I would say that's certainly an upgrade over Levi Wallace, who started at right cornerback for first half of the season. And then they flip-flop Patrick Peterson and who else over there. Like the combination of what they have at these positions now collectively, I'm intrigued by, because it's on paper, there's no question that it's an upgrade over 4. Like Cameron Sutton over Chandon Sullivan pretty easily. I thought KZ was okay in a role, but I think he probably needs to be just a rotational safety type guy that can come in certain packages. I like Elliott better than KZ, and I like Dante Jackson better than the combination of Levi Wallace and an aging Patrick Peterson. Do you feel the same way about that?
I do, but it is interesting that we can upgrade at pretty much every spot going into the year, because of course Joey is now entrenched in the corner one. Porter Jr. obviously he's going to start the season as the number 1 guy and not have to be worked in for half the year for whatever reason. Would still love to get an answer about what they're waiting to see from him, but that's beside the point now. But undoubtedly a much better unit going into the season. And the sad part is it's still not great, in my opinion. Like it looks much more passable. Like I think teams are not going to look at the Steelers on the schedule and be like, man, if we can just block TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith, we're good. Like that's kind of what it felt like last year, and it was right most of the time. Now it's not quite that level of like, okay, we're not going to be able to, like, we'll just be able to do whatever we want. It's not that way now. I will say, if I had to guess what the weakest link is going to be, is I still think it's probably Dante Jackson, just my opinion of him at this point. Like, I think he's just kind of prone to letting some stuff up because he thinks he can counter it with speed if he misses, and he just doesn't always work that way. He's getting a little bit older himself, 28, I believe now. Like, he feels like the potential where, like, every couple games we might get one of those, like, kind of like what it was for almost every game with Levi. So again, an upgrade there. But man, where's he at, basically, whenever the receiver catches the ball, like that type of stuff, but for different reasons. But outside of him, though, I think that everything is pretty solid. Like Elliott, solid safety. We know Joey's going to be able to, even if it's a little up and down with his play style, like we know he's going to be able to do a lot of good things. Sutton should be a good slot corner, even if he's not, as maybe quite as good as he was a couple of years ago. He should still be a passable slot corner. It's what do you get from Jackson, and then the rest of the pieces around them. How do they kind of fit in when they need to? Yeah,
exactly. And I'm interested to see how this all plays out.
Yeah,
where on this secondary, Shayne, do you think is the worst depth? I should say, like where it's like. Obviously, you can't lose Joey Porter Jr., right? Like that would be the big one, even more so than Minka. I mean, you got KZ there at least who could fill in. You lose Porter. I mean, you're essentially leaving that up to a Corey Trice, a Darius Rush, a Ryan Watts. I don't know who you're you're filling in at that point, but you're going with a completely unproven player. Same with slot still too, like with Sutton. If Sutton were to go down, who is the next guy up?
I think that's the issues. I think technically you could just say corner, but it's specifically slot, because if Sutton goes down now that he's on the team, that was the biggest question mark on this defense prior to this signing. And it still is. It's not that it's not a question mark at all, because we saw what Sutton looked like last year. Again, should be in a different role, should be better, suited for what he does well. But if he were to go down and he's the starting slot to start the year, I don't know what the recourse is. Like, I legitimately don't know who steps on the field for him. I really don't. Like, I'm not sure what their first idea would be. Maybe Trice is like a oversized, like overhang type of slot, kind of like in the Hamilton style mold for like what the Ravens are doing with him. Could be something like that. Could be Beanie Bishop if he makes the roster out of training camp. Like, I'm not really sure. It's tough to answer that question. So it kind of has to be slot for me, because I don't have an answer for who would be the slot corner. At least with corner, like, I may not love the depth, but I kind of know who it's going to be.
Yeah.
With slot, it's much different. I've kind of grab bag of guys of who knows what it would be. So
yeah, exactly. And the other question, I think, now that we've got this core kind of figured out here, your three cornerbacks, your two boundary cornerbacks, your slot, your two safeties, who emerges as that, like, the dime defender, which is a guy that comes in here situationally. Like, is there a role for Corey Trice in that? I mean, he's got the body of a safety. Who's going to end up being that guy?
Yeah, that's who I want it to be, because I think he has the most talent outside of the starting group.
I agree.
And honestly, more so than some of the guys in the starting group, in my opinion. But again, a younger player who missed his entire rookie season. If he's healthy enough to get through all the camps, get through main training camp, and get onto the roster, I do think if he's given opportunities to play, he will show up and he will be a really good player for them. I do wonder, like I said, could he be kind of like an overhang defender type of guy? Could he be like a big slot, like we've seen kind of with Hamilton with the Ravens and other places where guys have done that? Can he do that where Sutton maybe then steps outside briefly, or he gets off the field a little bit since he is getting a little bit older? That's kind of who I hope it is. Now, more likely to start the year, it's probably KZ, the veteran, say, like a guy like that, just because the veteran presence, he's been playing for the Steelers a couple of years. Like, that's my guess is who like the first guy at the bench would be. But I do think it's going to matter based on the matchups they're getting, hopefully at least. So
I agree. I think KZ obviously has got a lot of experience covering the slot in the past. I do want to see who can be that next guy up that emerges, though. And that's what I think that it's going to make training camp and preseason fun this year. The Steelers have some talented backup cornerbacks with length and athletic traits. And so interested to see which guy wins the jousting battle there. Shayne, anything else you want to get to before we move on to our next topic today?
No, I think I'm good on my end. So.
All right. If you are a fan of Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. All right, Shayne, let's move from one Cam to the next. Let's talk about Cameron Heyward and his sticky contract situation. I call it sticky because this thing is not cut and dry. It's not one of those situations where it's like, oh, this is a no-brainer move. Like TJ Watt, no-brainer move. As long as it took to get the deal done, and basically for him to say, eventually walk up to the front office.
Like, too bad. I don't care. Yeah.
As long as that took, we knew it was happening.
Yes. Yeah.
The difference here is there are so many factors at play, and ones that the Steelers, Omar Khan and Andy Weidl have to be really careful with, because this is a hefty investment for a player who is not the face of your franchise anymore, who is not in the prime of his career. And so we're going to break this down in detail, and we'll talk about the good, talk about the bad. And essentially, I want to hear your answer, Shayne, what the Steelers should do here, and I'll give you mine. Let's first talk about this, though. Heyward said he wants to play 3 more years.
Yeah.
This is something that he recently reiterated. That's a long time. And I'm not saying that it's impossible. I think that a lot of times I like to comp Heyward to like a Calais Campbell. I know a little bit different type of player, but a big, long, powerful defensive lineman who can rotate across the defensive line, who has just stuck it to father time here these last couple of years. 37.7 years old right now, coming off of a good season with the Falcons. Started all 17 games in Atlanta, 6.5 sacks, graded out, was it like the 23rd best? They actually graded him out as an edge defender last year.
He played more
how
snaps
often he
edge,
played as a base end last year. And so, but if Heyward can do this, that's great. But the problem is here, Shayne, is we don't know what the longevity looks like. Can you tie yourself into a 3-year contract for a player who is already 35 years old. And so essentially what you're doing is you're going to make a prediction about how this guy is going to be at 36, 37, and 38 years old, whether or not you ever see that final season. Can he be Calais Campbell? Can he be a guy that keeps defying father time and play those 3 years that he intends to?
So I think the first thing I'd want to know from him is like, so 3 years, is that including this year? Because then we really only have to extend you for 2, right? That'd be my first question.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that's what he means when he says that, at least from
playing 3 more years. I would assume that means an extension of 2 years with this year, which again would
exactly. Yeah, I'm hoping so. So that's the first thing. That does make things a little different because again, 30, you see 38 on the screen, you're like, that's an old player for anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But I think with him, the question for me about whether or not he can play that long, I think is pretty simple. I do think he can because of the type of player he has become, where it's about his length and power and just pure strength more than anything else. Like he still has quickness even for his age. He still has enough burst to get to the quarterback whenever he has a lane. But this is a guy who just simply is stronger than almost anyone he plays against, right? That's something that doesn't really go away at that age typically for guys. Like as long as they're keeping up their body and everything's healthy, like he's going to have that power, the knockback power, the power of the run game, the ability to shed blocks, do all that. My bigger question is, can he produce as a pass rusher at a level that is required to be a top of the line paid defensive tackle, right? That's the bigger question for me. I think his run game presence is going to be there for as long as he plays. I think the ability to at least push the pocket is going to be there for as long as he plays because of the power profile. It's can he be an impact pass rusher that he's been for nearly a decade now, right? Like obviously a slower start to his career, a guy who's really aged very well, obviously, and that's part of why you maybe feel comfortable extending him past this year. But can he remain a true like asset in the passing game, or is it going to be more of like you don't have to take him off the field, but you should have somebody else out there that can really rush the passer, which, hey, we maybe have one with Ben, maybe. So that helps. But still, that's my biggest question with that of him playing 3 more years is can he be in a pass rusher for 3 more years?
Yeah, and it's a legitimate question because when we saw Heyward come back after the groin injury last year and play those final 10 games, he offered very little as a pass rusher.
Wasn't
like
much.
Didn't have a QB hit in the last 5 games of the season, recorded 2 sacks in 11 total games last year. Now, obviously, he was an older player coming back from a groin injury, but because he's an older player coming back from a groin injury, you have to question how long it's going to take him to bounce back if something else happens. And so I think that's another factor that needs to be considered at the very least. Pass rush wise, he was not as effective as we've seen in really at any point in his career. Like he was still a very powerful and stout run defender. That's where he made his bread and butter last year.
Right.
The problem is I can't pay a interior defender that much money, the money that he's wanting to get, if he's not going to be a better pass rusher than it was. Like if last year is a testament of what he's going to be moving forward, I'd say it's a definite no. Now, obviously you have to project forward and say, yes, you are going to be another year older, but you're also going to be another year removed from that groin injury.
Right.
Can you stay on the field and can you offer what you did in 2019, 2021? I don't know. I think those days are behind him. I think it's more like you're looking at, hopefully you can get a 2022 Cameron Heyward back. That becomes the big question here. Now, how much should he make on his deal, Shayne? And this is the other one. Now, I broke this down a little bit, and so Heyward, essentially what he's looking for is that 20 million mark. Like that, the guy I think would be satisfied if he can reach that 20 million mark. Obviously, he's going to want a large portion of that guaranteed for his purposes. If he gets a career-ending injury or something this late in his career, doesn't need to worry about another contract, but he's set for life at that point. 20 million, I think, is the magic number that would make him really happy. But Shayne, if you look at this and some of the other guys that are making that $20 million mark, Dexter Lawrence, 26 years old, maybe the best interior defender in the NFL now that Aaron Donald is retired.
Might be.
Quinnen Williams, 26 years old, coming off another amazing season, excellent football player. Derek Brown, 26 years old, guy just got paid. In the Heyward mold as a terrific run defender, but even a bigger type player than that. Now Heyward's way bigger than is listed away because something I find comical is totally off topic. A guy that comes into the league like 13 years ago, and they never change his weight like
They never
throughout his career.
updated
It's
it.
like, oh,
Yeah.
hey, Cameron Heyward's 285 pounds. I'm like, no, he is
There's
not.
no,
And
there's
that
no
guy's gotten
shot.
bigger every single
Yeah.
year.
It's
So
actually, it's funny
uh,
because we just had a chat about seeing him next to Benton yesterday. He looked 320, 325. Benton's 305, 310. Yeah.
he's big. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's big at
Hayward
this
has
point.
been bigger than he's been 300 plus for probably more than a decade. Let's just be honest.
Yeah, and that goes back to my conversation, Shayne,
Yeah.
about why I like the tall, long guys, because those guys can add weight and they can add muscle every year and get stronger every year.
Yeah.
And they got the frame to put it on, and Heyward always had that frame to put it on. That guy's big. You look at him compared to the other defensive linemen right now.
Yeah,
I don't know.
like
I'd like to ask him that.
Yeah, like, what's your plan
but
right
we
now?
keep, I asked that to Watt when we had the interview back then. I actually had one that fell through with Heyward. I would have asked him that, but let's talk about some of these other names on here. Chris Jones, 29 still. He's not Cameron Heyward old. I mean, he's 6 years younger than Heyward still. And the guy's getting paid atop the league, $31.75 million. A lot of money, but Chris Jones is in a kind of a category of his own because of his combination as a pass rusher and just overall football player. Justin Matabuke is 26 years old. Jeffrey Simmons is 26 years old. So you're looking at Heyward compared to most of these guys that are getting paid the 20 plus million mark are nearly a decade younger than Cameron Heyward. We can't act like that doesn't factor into the contract discussion here.
Yeah, that's ultimately the issue with this. Is it's not about whether or not I think Cam can keep playing in the NFL for the next couple of years that he wants to finish out, and if he thinks he can play 3 more years, it's how much is he willing to be paid to do so? Because if you're the Steelers, so much of your money for really a long time now, pretty much since the end of the Killer Bees era, right, has been about paying the defense. It's been about collecting talent on that side of the football, getting them in the building and paying them. And that's great. You know, I'm not saying that's a bad thing necessarily, but at some point, partially because Pickens is going to need a new contract in the next couple of years, the offensive linemen are mostly young, but there's guys you're going to have to make decisions about in the next couple of years. Like, you're going to have to start allocating some of that money on the offense in some way, shape, or form. Paying an aging Cam Heyward $20 million plus a year, even if it's only for a couple of years, just probably isn't your best use of resources, realistically, right? So it's about finding a number that Cam's comfortable with, that the team's comfortable with. Personally, I think combined with the fact that he's getting older, combined with the injury last year, combined again with the fact that I don't know how much more effective of a pass rusher he's going to be than kind of like a middle tier player at this point, from that part of the game at least, right? As run defender, I still think he's going to be good. I don't know if I'd want to pay him more than like that he's getting paid right now on a yearly basis, right? Like, I know this is the end of that contract and a lot of things have changed with the interior defensive line market, but if he wants more than, $15-16 million a year, I can't say that it's actually like a smart contract. Like, hey, I can't sit here and say that this is a value for him. I just think that anything more than that would probably be him getting paid because of who he is, not necessarily what he's going to be.
Yeah, no, I definitely get that. I mean, that makes perfect sense. And Barley chimes in again. Cam is an $8 to $12 million a year guy. That I'm interesting that you brought that up, because if I go back to Calais Campbell in 2021, Campbell made $8 million a year on a 1-year deal. 2022 made 12.5 on a 1-year contract, and then last year, 1-year $8 million deal with the Falcons. And so, if we're kind of using this as like the baseline, like, all right, that's what Campbell got at age 35, 36, 37. If we're doing something similar with Heyward, it would be in that ballpark. And you're talking like, that's really low. And so now, again, adjust for inflation, if you will, that's fine. Campbell was a better pass rusher than Heyward was last year. Heyward probably was the 2 years prior to that, but Campbell was still a really solid football player. Like, still, there was nothing to cause him to suddenly get this much lower pay other than his age. Like, he was still a stout run defender, could long arm people back into the quarterback and still offered some pass rush prowess, even in his old age. It was essentially just his age that was the determining factor here and why he's not getting paid like other guys. Like, if similar type body, but if he was DeForest Buckner and significantly younger, he's getting paid significantly more. There's no doubt in my mind that he is. And so the age was the factor, and it has been the factor these past 3 years with a guy like Calais Campbell. Why wouldn't it be with Cameron Heyward? Now, I know Hayward's overall reputation is even higher than what Campbell's was. Campbell's, I think, is 6-time Pro Bowler, made first team All-Pro once. Heyward is nearly on a Hall of Fame track with it being a 4-time or 3-time first team All Pro and a 6-year span of Pro Bowls.
Something like that.
I'm spitfiring here.
Yeah, 6 or 7.
So the reputation, the personal accolades are a little bit higher there. But other than that, I mean, you call it for what it is. It's hard to it's hard to argue like when you're seeing a similar type player making a fraction of what Heyward is asking for and go ahead and say, all right, I'm going to just trust that you're going to be the pass rusher that you were 2-3 years ago to give you $20+ million a year. I'm not sure if that's a wise decision, Shayne. And so I think this comes back to the conversation that we've had multiple times in the past. And one of my mottos is you don't pay for pass production. Yeah. If everybody lives by this, you're going to make a lot better business decisions. And what the Steelers would be doing by paying Heyward $20 million per year is they would be paying for pass production. You would be paying Heyward. It'd almost be like a thank you note for what he did in 21, 22, back in 2020, rather than paying the 36, 37, maybe even a 38-year-old player that you think you're going to have these next 3 or even 4 seasons in the NFL. I don't think he's going to make it that long as much as he's already defied time. It seems like an unwise decision to get into that ballpark of a number.
Yeah. And another contract to kind of look at to give you an idea of what it probably should be if we're being just like 100% honest about it. Mm-hmm. Fletcher Cox signed a 1-year, $10 million deal last year at a younger age for an Eagles team. Now, granted, as good as Fletcher Cox was, like his drop off was also pretty steep the year before. Like this was clearly like they wanted him around still, but they didn't want to pay him top dollar after he'd been a really good defensive tackle for them for a long time. That's kind of closer to, again, what Heyward should probably be expecting. Like if he hit the open market, I'm not sure if teams would pay him significantly more than that number. And I think he has to understand that, like, even though he still thinks he can play at a high level, the most recent sample size we got, again, he had the injury, but he came back and played 10 games. Like at some point you have to get back to being that player during the year, and it just didn't happen. And again, he could flip the script this year. And if I was him, then I'd probably want a 1-year, like $10 million deal, maybe guarantee all of it like the Eagles did, like say, hey, you're going to get this money no matter what happens this year. Here it is. We'll see what happens after next year. That's probably what I'd want if I was him, because it gives him the chance to re-up and kind of show that he's still the same guy. And if he does it next year where he's just as good as he's always been, yeah, maybe you slap another like 1 or 2 year deal worth close to that $20 million if he's still playing at that level. So maybe that ends up being what it is. I still think it's going to be probably a 2-year deal for, $15+ million. If I had to guess, I'm not going to say it's going to be 20, but at least probably 15 or so. And it is certainly one of those deals that could not end up working out. It just depends.
Yeah, I love the Fletcher Cox comparison too, because that's another guy that was similarly dominant during his prime. Obviously, exited that and ended up retiring. But another guy who kind of fits that profile and just went on the 1-year deal. Now, looking back at Campbell again, I think the selling point was these teams giving him the deals, the Ravens and then the Falcons this past year, they were willing to give him essentially fully guaranteed money. In 2021, all $8 million of his 1-year contract was guaranteed. In 2022, only $6.25 million was guaranteed of the $12 million total. So you get a bigger base there, but you don't get as much guarantee. And then last year, 1 year, $7 million, fully guaranteed. Maybe this is their approach the Steelers should be trying to take with Cam. Now, again, that's a decision is ultimately up to him. He doesn't have to do anything he doesn't want to do. But I do feel like offering a higher number of guaranteed money maybe could be that kind of trade-off that can keep the cap hit for the Steelers a little bit lower, right? And then allow him to kind of prove himself again. I think he just wants the stability, honestly, of getting one big, massive payday to close out his career. So I understand where he's coming from, but it's got to work for both parties.
For sure.
All right, Shayne, when could the Steelers get something done with Cam Heyward? This is a question that I think we can kind of use TJ Watt's timeline in 2021 as an outline. Like, I would be really surprised if something doesn't get done by then. If it doesn't, and the Steelers are entering the season with this, they're just going to let it play out. It wouldn't be the most surprising thing in the world, though, because Omar Khan is doing things different than what Kevin Colbert has done, plain and simple. And so obviously this is one of the leaders of the team, one of the best players on the team, but because of the state that they're in right now and just looking at how they've done things, Is there a possibility the Steelers go into the season without Cameron Heyward signed?
I do think it's more of a possibility than it would have been a few years ago, but I still think that they want this to be put to bed before the season starts. I think I think Cam is too smart to do this, and I think he's too much of a team player to do this. But I think that it would be a distraction of some kind, even if Cam doesn't make a big deal of it, even if internally he doesn't speak on it too much. Like, I think the team will be like, hey, this guy has been kind of the rock for this defense for over a decade. Like, can't we get something done with him to make sure he sticks around until he's done? Like, I think there is some internal, I wouldn't say pressure, because I think this team operates the way it does, and the players either like it or they don't, and it's pretty simple. But I don't know if they want that kind of looming over them as they try to figure out so much of what this team is supposed to be. The offense, obviously, the defense coming back to full strength. Like, there's a lot of things riding on this season, honestly, and I don't know if they want that to be a part of that conversation, right? So I think for better or for worse, either they're going to make a decision about what they want to do with him before the season starts, or they just say it's not happening and we're not going to. This is the end, basically. Like, it's going to be one of those two. And I don't expect that to be the case. So I think something gets done. I just do hope that they don't go overboard with it, right? That's kind of my biggest thing, is try to be reasonable about what you should expect from him at this point.
Yeah, they've got enough going on. They've got enough roster turnover. They're not going to want this as a distraction that lingers on here. And so I would venture a guess that it's going to happen before TJ Watt's time frame, where it's like you're strolling in like shortly before the season and getting something done. And so I think it'll be done before that. But it comes down to this final question for our show today, Shayne. Should the Steelers extend Cam Heyward? I can see both sides here. I can see the nostalgia factor. I can see wanting this player that has been just an outstanding leader, one of the best players in your organization of the 2000s, and having him retire as a member of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think there is some value in the Steelers kind of carrying that tradition on with their best players. And it certainly appeases the fans that way. From a business standpoint, though, you look at the other way. Can the Steelers afford to make this? Not just financially, though, but what's going to hit them down the line? Is it worth the trade-off of potentially eating dead cap space 2 years from now or 3 years from now to have him around for another year or two and then have him up and retire or whatever? From a financial standpoint, you can argue the opposite. So, Shayne, what do you think? Should the Steelers sign Cam Heyward? And what would be like the breaking point for you to say, like, I can't do anymore?
Yeah, I think the answer to whether they should is pretty strongly yes. It's just about the specifics of it is for me.
Yeah.
Like, clearly what he's able to do just as a run defender, and again, occasionally as a pass rusher, even last year, but especially if he can get back closer to like the 2022 version of himself, like you were talking about, is well worth not only a starting spot, but, being one of the top 20-ish players at his position, right? It's, again, what does it look like? What's the structure of it? How long is the contract? All of that matters significantly with a player that just had some injury issues, that is, in the mid-30s. That's what matters more than anything else. But in the macro, yes, they should extend him. I think for me, the breaking point would be wanting guarantees beyond the end of next season. I think that if he wants to sign a bigger deal, especially, that money has to be guaranteed for that first season of the extension and nothing past that. At least not anything significant, because that's where you can save a lot of money on the cap, where, after next year, especially, let's say they decide to do like a 1-year deal with Fields to come in and either start again, or if he does play this year, start or whatever. And then they need to have money to pay him if that works out, or the Pickens contract that's coming down the line, if they want to do that, or whatever it is, right? They need to make sure their finances are in a good place, not specifically next year, I think, but more importantly in 2026 and beyond. If he's willing to take like a 2-year deal, he has to be willing to have a lot of it guaranteed for the first year and not much past that. That would be my sticking point if I'm negotiating with him.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to find any fan who doesn't want Cam Heyward around. Right. I think that it's obviously it comes down to finances, like it does everything. Business decisions have to be made. The harsh reality, Shayne, of the NFL is that you just don't get many players anymore in today's game who start and finish their career over a decade long with the same team. It didn't even happen for Tom Brady. It didn't happen for Peyton Manning. And those are the two biggest names in NFL history, arguably. And so it's not happening for everybody. You go where the money takes you. And at some point, it makes more sense for another team than it does for the Steelers. So, for example, if another team is a competitor next year and wanted to sign Heyward, that might make more financial sense for them to bite the bullet and eat some and tack on some voidable years or whatever than it does for a team like the Steelers, who can't win a playoff game, let alone make a Super Bowl push right now. And so it's all circumstantial, but there is a breaking point. There is a cutoff line where you have to say, I love you, Cam. You've been awesome to this organization, but we just can't extend you. We just can't afford to do it. It's not in the best interest of our team. And if you look at our roster all around, we're a young team outside of you and TJ and our quarterback, who knows how long he's going to be starting for anyway, before maybe the switch is made to Justin Fields. Outside of that, you're a pretty young team overall. And so it doesn't really fit the direction of the team to keep a 36, 37-year-old player around unless they are legitimately going to be in Super Bowl contention, because the only way you can justify eating $20-ish million a year in salary cap space is if you are competing for a Super Bowl. So if you're a believer the Steelers can do that, you're probably on board with this Cam extension. If you're not, if you don't believe that they're in that position yet, then it probably makes most sense financially to kind of let it play out and kind of let him walk, or see how things go this year and say, all right, I'd love to be able to sign you because you did prove yourself, or now we see that the team is in a position to do something more, and we'd like to have you back. I just don't know if Cam would be willing to go for that at all. Would he be willing to hold out games, Shayne, and being at risk of losing paychecks because he's so set on wanting more guaranteed money? And I get it for his financial stability. So I can truly see things from both sides of the argument. My breaking point for me, it's a hard question because I hate to draw the line at like, all right, 15 million. That's it. Not going over.
Right.
Well, about 15 million and one penny. What about 15.5 million? Like
now you're playing the game, Price is Right game with them at that point.
Yeah. So you're doing the Price is Right this much, but not going over. There is a point, and I can't tell you exactly where that is, where I no longer would feel comfortable saying, and obviously the way that contracts are structured, you can get the cap hit low in the first year or two. You can backload it. You can tack on voidable years. I'm just not in favor of doing any financial move that cap straps the team in the future, even with the salary cap going up substantially every year. I don't want to cap strap the team in the future. I want to capitalize where the window presents itself, Shayne. And so if the window is going to be 2 years from now, I want as much cap space as humanly possible to work with so that the Steelers can. And at that point, if you want to say, all right, now I'm going to backload contracts. Now I'm going to go out and make trades. I'm going to sign high profile free agents. Capitalize when the window opportunity presents itself. And before we sign off here, I want to use an example. You go look at the Los Angeles Rams and how they did business with Sean McVay. Now you could look at them now and say, oh, look at this team that they don't have talent. They're a train wreck. They only have an aging quarterback and Puka Nacua, and that's all well and fine. They won a Super Bowl because they capitalized at the right time. They were willing to get aggressive when they needed to get aggressive. They waited for that window of opportunity. And now, sure, they are what they are. It's worth it if it results in a Super Bowl. And so my ultimate goal, Shayne, is the Super Bowl. If a deal with Heyward is going to cap strap this team in the future, then I'm not going to be a fan of it. But if it helps them win right now, and you can kind of do the Calais Campbell method, if I can get you back on a 1 year, even 12 million fully guaranteed, 14 million fully guaranteed, I'd be much more apt to do that than I would to cap strap myself for the future. And so that's where I am with the Cam Heyward contract situation. I'd love to hear what anybody else has to say. If you have your thoughts on this, please drop them in the comment section here on YouTube. We would love to hear what you have to say and what kind of a deal you think Cameron Heyward should receive, as opposed to what he might actually get with the Steelers. I'll be interested to see how this unfolds. Obviously, Cam's back at the facility. We'll see if there's any progress here. There hasn't been any deep contract talks yet. He said there are things in the works, but these two sides could be very far off still. I'll be interested to see how long this lingers here. All right. Thank you for joining us today on the show. We go live every single Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time on YouTube. You can follow right along with us and chime in our live chat. Thank you for joining us on the show today. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Steel Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcast. Also, check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Steel Curtain podcast. And thanks again for listening to the Steel Curtain podcast.